Robert Plant, Ukraine will lose the Biden war and NATO will disappear. No. Russia is losing between 500 and 1,000 people a day. The ratio, the battlefield casualty ratio, is 1 Ukrainian for every 10 Russians. Russians don't have guns. Their tanks are getting blown up like crazy. They don't have air superiority. They're about to suffer a major offensive this spring that's just going to just wipe out any of the Russian front line. They're begging North Korea for weapons. They're begging China for weapons. It's not looking good for Russia at this point. And their economy is starting to contract. 5% of military-aged males have fled the country. 5%. It's a million. A million men have fled the country, and they're like, peace. And most of those men are skilled labor. Talking people with college degrees, people with technical fields, people with means, with money. They're the ones who are fleeing the country. And so the economy is really starting to contract, and they're selling oil basically at a loss at this point to India and China. There's really no hope for Russia out of this. And I mean, they might, dead man switch it and hit it and try to fire a nuke just to piss everyone off. But my guess is Russia will get its ass kicked so thoroughly some point this summer that they'll lose most of the Eastern Front, if not Crimea as well. Russia has no chance. They're starting to send 70-year-old tanks to the front lines now. Like non-updated tanks, T-55s and crap that have no business being in a modern battlefield. Studebaker trucks that were Lend-Lease trucks from 1939 that the United States sent them are now appearing on the front lines. 80-year-old trucks. Like, that'll do it. Meanwhile, we've got our old equipment, our 30-year-old NATO equipment, just shredding Russian positions and weapons. Russia doesn't stand a chance there, Robert. Dillerman's Wharf, do you think Putin will listen to Xi? So, Putin really wants Chinese weapons. He needs Chinese weapons. There's only hope to stave off any offensive that the Ukrainians may do. China does not want to give him weapons because China knows that their weapons cannot handle the guided anti-tank missiles that NATO has. They just can't. They're going to get shredded. And then China will be like, our weapons can't handle 30, 40-year-old NATO weapons. Therefore, our hopes and dreams of scaring Taiwan into doing our bidding is gone. So that's the big mix. Plus, if they give Russia weapons, then Russia has a way of defending their oil fields from China when China wants to go take them after Putin collapses. Because the Chinese are just like, oil in Siberia. Siberia is a bunch of weenies out in the sticks, and we're just going to take all their oil. And there'll be a complete rewriting of the entire map. Putin's entire calculus on this was so misguided because the Russian tradition is when there's bad news, you can't say there's bad news because then you'll get blamed for the bad news. So you tell them whatever they want to hear. Like, oh, do you have 50,000 men in your battalion? You say yes, even though you got 20,000 men in your battalion, because you say yes, you get the paychecks for 30,000 men that you can use to buy your yachts in Italy, right? And go sail the Mediterranean and eat caviar and whatnot. There we go. That's what she wanted. And so when things started to go wrong, right? Oh, well, you got to take all 50,000 of your men and do a blitzkrieg across Ukraine. They go, okay, totally. And they're like, okay, we don't have 50,000 men. We got 20,000. That means every single solitary man has to be inside of a tank to cross the border because we don't have enough infantry to guard the tanks. And all of our officers have to drive the tanks, so they won't be coordinating on the battlefield. And then they get wiped out because there was no infantry to guard the tanks from the guided anti-tank missiles. And then you have to report back to Putin like things are successful, even though you took 90% casualties. And Putin's like, excellent. Then why haven't we taken Kyiv? And you're like, it was his battalion that failed. And then Putin has to go like execute that general, put a new one in charge who's like, wait, there's no men here. And Putin's like, how are you doing? And he can't say, I'm not making any progress because he doesn't have any men. He has to say, things are great. And it just collapses. It just collapses in on itself. So, will Putin listen to Xi? Putin thinks he's top dog. Xi knows he is. So there may be a come to Jesus moment, but Putin does not like bowing to anyone. And if he has to do something that Xi tells him to do, it's going to just be a disaster, an absolute disaster for Putin. They'll show him as weak and ineffectual, and that might be enough for whoever's left in the regime to topple him. He's kind of eliminated most of the threats that were there. But if Putin gets pushed back and loses Crimea especially, then that's it. His presidency is over. His dictatorship is over. Someone, from Wagner Group or whoever will take the job. And it'll be just as shitty as it was before. Mullick Woolhead, is Ukraine basically an Afghanistan 2.0 that will destroy Russia for years? If so, how long will they be destroyed? Yes. I mean, in a year, they've lost 200,000 troops. 200,000. Those are numbers we have not seen on a battlefield in decades from a traditional army. Like 15 years in Vietnam, we lost 50,000 soldiers. 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan, we lost 5,000. 200,000 soldiers lost in a year. That's half of what the United States lost in World War II over nearly 5 years. Think about that. Like, they're losing soldiers at twice the rate of our antiquated World War II frontline battlefield mayhem. Right? They're literally throwing bodies at it. These soldiers don't have guns. If they do have guns, they don't have bullets. If they do have bullets, they don't have uniforms. They get the summer uniforms in the winter. They get the winter uniforms in the summer, and they just the amount of bodies on the front line is insane. And there's no ability to collect those bodies. It's like World War I. It's just they're just piling on top of each other, making new soil. It's crazy. Those type of losses are unsustainable. They're losing, 10, 20 tanks a day. How many tanks do they have to start with? Number of tanks in a Russian army. So, battlefield with 2,600 tanks, right? Another 400 T-72 variants. So maybe they got 3,000 tanks. So they're out. That's T-72s, T-80s, T-90s, and T-72 variants. That doesn't count the T-64s, T-55s that they're sending, which are the reserves. There's probably a few thousand more of those. The T-14s can't get built because they accidentally mobilized everyone who was on that assembly line, and they're all dead in a ditch somewhere. They've got 5 fifth-generation fighters. They're all built by hand. They have no fleet of those, and none of those have seen any action. And if you look at satellite photos, there's like 2 of them have been cannibalized already, so they're down to like 3. Yeah, another big problem that Russia has is that a lot of their legacy fleet of vehicles and jets were stripped. Why? Because guys like me gets gold out of them. So any of the sophisticated electronics from the Soviet era has just an obscene amount of gold in those circuits. And so you rip out a navigation system or a targeting system, and you might get several ounces of gold just out of one tank. So a lot of their legacy systems were taken out of these things and turned into gold ingots that a bunch of hoodlums sold, and they had to pay remittances to their general. So they just don't have the weaponry. They just don't have it. They don't take care of it. We saw from their blitzkrieg that no one's rotated a tire in 40 years, right? They have 40-year-old tires that were just popping like crazy because they've been all dry rotted. They don't have what it takes to win a battle. They don't. What we're seeing out of them is what we saw out of them in World War I, World War II, the Russo-Japanese War. They just throw bodies at it until they lose, and they go, "Huh, we are big and tough," and that seems to be their MO, man. So it's definitely destroying Russia in a way that not even Afghanistan could have. How many soldiers did they lose in Afghanistan? They lost 15,000 troops in 10 years in Afghanistan. And they've lost 200,000 in this one. I mean, most of what Afghanistan was gunship helicopters just strafing ridgelines. It wasn't necessarily troops on the ground. So this is World War I style trench warfare being fought by one side and modern warfare being fought by the other side. And it's just not even fair. Man. So they lost 1,500 a year in Afghanistan, and they're losing 200,000 a year here. I wouldn't want to mess with those Ukrainians. They have some serious weaponry. So when it was obvious that the Blitzkrieg stalled at the beginning of the war, all the FSB put their homes in Crimea up for sale. Like every last one of them, like for sale. You look on their equivalent of Zillow, and it's just like the number of homes that went for sale was crazy, but there's no one to buy. So I'm really curious to see, like, if Ukraine takes Crimea, how they allocate homes, how they allocate land, who gets what. There's a bunch of Ukrainians that got shipped off to Siberia, a bunch of Tatars that disappeared that were the indigenous people to the Crimean Peninsula. They're just gone now. How do they bring those people back to take those homes again? I mean, they don't have to go much further towards Crimea to get, the HIMARS systems within range of the Karch Bridge. And my guess is the Ukrainians may leave a lane open for the Karch Bridge so everyone can get the hell out, and then they'll take care of it. But there's no train service. The train tracks were destroyed. They've removed some of the spans, and it's going to be another year or so before they can get the train service going again. So they've got the ferry and they've got the road, and part of the road they can't use because it's still destroyed.